So welcome to Who's Looking Through Your Data webinar. I'm David Richards. I'm the Program Manager of the Quest for Canada Smartest IT. And we're pleased to present this very topical webinar about how you can better protect your data and your company information. Now just a brief background on the Quest. Quest for Canada Smartest IT is a free service recognizes specific achievements in IT in Canada and provides the tools that organizations need to become Canada's Smartest IT. The site itself provides best practice guidance on deployment of technologies and services and offers a variety of assessment tools to help determine where your organization stands and what issues you need to address to become Canada's Smartest IT. So we invite you to visit www.smartest-it.ca to do that. Now moving on to today's webinar, protecting your information has always been very critical, but the days of locking your corporate secrets in a drawer in your office are long gone. And with the increase in the access availability and people accessing information from around the world and through a multitude of devices, it's becoming more and more important that we protect your data properly. So today we've got two experts here who are going to walk through little things and move you through where we go here. First of all, I'd like to introduce Christian Lovejoy. She's the Vice President of Information Technology Risk for IBM. And is responsible for managing, monitoring, and testing IBM's corporate security and resiliency functions globally. She's chairman of IBM's IT Risk Steering Committee, co-chair of IBM's Data Security Steering Committee, a member of IBM's Security Executive Board, as well as a member of a number of external boards and advisory panels. Speaking with her is James Quinn, who's the lead research analyst with Infotech Research Group. James has held a variety of roles in the field of information technology for over 10 years. And prior to joining Infotech, James was employed with a startup security company where he held a higher number of roles, and his exposure to all aspects to the organization, as well as his participation in the transition of the company from a dedicated service organization to a dedicated software organization, greatly expanded his knowledge of the IT security field. And James is regularly sought out by the end users and the media for his expertise and insights. So James is going to start us off, and then we're going to have a dialogue between him and Christian over the course of the webinar. If you look at the bottom of the webinar, there's an area where you can submit questions via email. So please submit your questions to us privately, and we'll get James and Christian to look at those over the course of the discussion and at the end of the show. So without further ado, I'll let James Quinn start here.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, and welcome to everybody. So I think probably the best way for me to open up the chat is just doing a little bit of an overview and looking at some of the recent security events that have gone down, some of the things that have gained significant notoriety, as a way of leveling the playing field and making sure they're all on the same page in terms of understanding what the threats are and what the concerns are. Typically, when we look at hacking attempts, they're going to break down to one or three reasons: for financial motives, for information gathering motives, or to a certain extent, still for entertainment and notoriety motives. A classic example, the whole financial gain, was the hack of the Sony PlayStation network. Now, when we look at the gathered intel, we can see that somewhere before April 19th, April 19th is when we finally the information was released that the hack had occurred. So sometime before there, the PlayStation network was hacked, and the personal information for somewhere in the neighborhood of 77 million subscribers was accessed and stolen. Now, that was a fairly broad database, and that included a lot of information. There were names, addresses, and birth dates of all of the subscribers. Valuable information in terms of building out false identities for identity theft. There were email addresses, and email addresses just by themselves are also very valuable because they are obviously the target of broad-scale spam and phishing attacks. The PlayStation Network user IDs and passwords were stolen. Now, on the surface, this may not seem to have a ton of value. Really, it's just the PlayStation Network. But what we've seen through history, through hacking history, is that users tend to repeat user IDs. They tend to repeat user passwords over and over for all of their sites. So, the strong likelihood here is that whatever user ID and password they were using on the PlayStation Network, there's a chance that they were using that same information, those same credentials, elsewhere, whether that be on their email accounts, whether that be bank accounts, whether that be any kind of online service. And so access to those user IDs and passwords becomes very, very valuable because potentially becomes a leverage into other services as well. Finally, there were a tremendous number of credit cards stolen. Credit card numbers along with expiration dates, although the CVV2, the security code from the back of the card, they were stolen as well. The CVV2s weren't included, so it makes it a little harder to use those cards, but certainly, they're still there and accessible. Now, when we look at what the value of this information is, we can look at the. Could I have the forward, please? When we look at the underground economy, the underground economy is defined as all of that criminal activity that is buying and selling in this information. When we look there, we can see that there is a tremendous amount of activity, and this marketplace is very robust, very significant, and we can find that data has a very distinct value. Identities, depending on whether you're buying one or buying them in bulk, where they are and how useful that particular identity is, they can range anywhere from 25 cents all the way up to $25 per identity. And identity exchange, this buying and selling of identities, represents nearly 10% of all transactions on the underground economy. Email addresses are worth anywhere from 30 cents to $40 per megabyte of email addresses. So we're talking obviously in bulk here. But again, spam and phishing is a significant focus of the underground economy, and this represents 20% of all transactions. Passwords can be worth anywhere up to $30 per individual password, and credit cards without the CVV2 can be worth anywhere from as little as 10 cents when bought in bulk to as much as $25 per card for certain types of cards from certain jurisdictions. And this represents nearly 30% of all transactions. So what we see when we look at the volume of data that was captured from the PlayStation Network and the value that that data has, we're looking at tens of millions of dollars. So we can see why that there is this definitive financial motive. I think this really helps to put a number and a picture around what the value of stolen information is, even if it's not intellectual property. Now, intellectual property is the subject of our next slide, where we're investigating the RSA hack. Now, not sure how familiar everybody is with what happened with RSA, but sometime between February 28th and March 17th, RSA themselves were infiltrated. Now, we know it happened sometime between the 28th and the 17th because the Adobe Flash zero-day exploit that was used in the penetration was released on February 28th. Didn't exist before that. And we know also that that RSA sent the letter to the SEC and their clients, their open letter, explaining what had happened on March 17th. So we have an 18-day time span in which someone, using a phishing attack, gathered credentials from some low-level employees, used those credentials to scout the inside of RSA's network, gather credentials of higher-powered people, greater capability credentials that they could use more efficiently, more effectively, find resources that they were looking for to capture, stage those resources, collect them from disparate locations, stage them into a central location, pack them as a RAR file, and then FTP them out of the organization, all within 18 days. Now we know that part of that process was a forensic investigation. Part of it was RSA very carefully crafting their letter. So the likelihood is that this was a very complex, very carefully undertaken attack that took place probably over a space of 7 and certainly no more than 10 days. Now, in and of itself, this is a concerning attack. Someone is really accessing some key intellectual property of a significant player on the market. However, what is more damaging is what happened subsequent to this attack. where at least 3 leading defense contractors were hacked using cloned secure ID tokens. So the information that was directly stolen from RSA was then used as a springboard, as a leverage into subsequent attacks on national defense contractors. So we had L3 being attacked sometime before April 6th. If we look at internal communications there, we have Lockheed Martin being hacked sometime before May 21st as a result, and we know this as a result of them shutting down their VPN connectivity, which relied on secure ID, and the same thing for Northrop Grumman sometime before May 26th. So, fairly quick attack on RSA, collecting information, and then very, very quickly that information is turned around to access even more information, and obviously, since these are defense contractors, even more sensitive information. So, these secondary attacks show that this wasn't someone just stealing the secure ID information to sell it or for the value or just to have this information. This was a targeted attack to make use of that information. So these are perhaps the most serious types of hacking, the financial and the intellectual property theft, but notoriety in entertainment or raising the profile of the hacker is still something that is done. Now, this was obviously far more prevalent in the early 90s with script kiddies who were all about website defacement and gaining popularity, making names for themselves. But we're starting to see a bit of a return of this in the activities of LulzSec. If I could have the next slide, please. So what we see when we look at LulzSec is they, over the period of about a month, starting late April, early May, they perpetrated a number of very, very high profile, very noticeable hacks. And these were all hacks aimed at non-financial reasons. They were hacks about gaining notoriety and visibility for the group. When we look at the motives behind a lot of these hacks, the group would come out and tell us, well, we hacked Fox because they made unfavorable comments about a rap star. And so they hacked them in retaliation. PBS published a documentary that was unfavorable to WikiLeaks. And so the group hacked PBS and posted fake news stories on their website. After the PlayStation Network, a few weeks later, LulzSec then hacked. LulzSec were not associated with the PSN hack, but they hacked Sony Pictures just to show that they still could. That Sony hadn't really, to coin a phrase, learned its lesson from what had happened with the PlayStation Network, that they were still very, very susceptible to security implications, that they had very, very weak security, and that they could very easily be compromised. So, LulzSec here, they claim that what they were doing is they were trying to show how unreliable, untrustworthy, and insecure Sony was, even after it had been pointed out to them by the PSN hack that this was the case. CIA, FBI contractors were also hacked, more of a thumbing their noses at authority. Now, the LulzSec guys, they published all this information freely. They posted it via their Twitter feed. They hosted it on a number of P2P sites so that the information was readily available. They weren't collecting this information for the financial value of it. They weren't trying to leverage and utilize this information in any way, shape, or form other than to raise awareness of who they were and what they were doing, and they were all out there having kicks. So, and really this stimulated a significant amount of press coverage for them. They ended up with over 350,000 followers on their Twitter account. They ended up getting quoted and even interviewed by Wired magazine. So they really were able to succeed in achieving the goals, in achieving their aims through the hacking. So that gives us a bit of an understanding of what the world is that we're dealing with. We have some very, very complex criminals out there who really understand our computer systems and our defenses probably better than we do. We have to make the assumption that RSA probably has a reasonable understanding of its security infrastructure, the defense contractors have a reasonable understanding of their security infrastructure. We're demonstrated that Sony didn't necessarily have a particularly good understanding of their security infrastructure, but they likely should have had a better idea. So we have a framework where there's a significant number of threats that we're faced with every day. We have a framework where there are a significant number of reasons for those threats to be perpetrated. And we have a framework where there are some extremely sophisticated criminals perpetrating these threats for us. So I think that brings us to the position where we understand the framework, we understand what it is that we're looking at, and why this is a concern for us. I think now what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Chris Lovejoy from IBM so that she can take us through a bit of a framework for how we can deal with these issues, how we can make sure that we are staying protected organizationally and limit the exposure